Okay, Alexander, let's talk about what's going on at the border between Belarus and Poland. Last I read, 3,000 migrants are at the border. They're trying to get through, actually, and the police on the Polish side, the military and the police on the Polish side, the border control, they've built barbed wire fences, chain fences around. They're actually starting to deploy tear gas as well. But the outside of this conflict at the border, there is a deep political undertone here that goes back to the elections in which took place like about a year ago, and the Protasevich incident with the Ryanair, and maybe even further back, I guess, if you trace it all the way back to Angela Merkel's, all migrants are welcome in 2015, and the fact that Belarus, kind of like Turkey, was bottling up those migrants within its borders in order to do the European Union a favor. Well, the European Union returned that favor with sanctions, and no airplanes can fly over Belarus. So what does Lukashenko do? Well, he unleashes the migrants onto Poland. So what a story this is. What do you make of it?
I think you've summed it up exactly correctly. I mean, this is a product of EU policies. On the one hand, the EU has set out its stall, and this is perhaps something that is more visible outside the EU, actually, than it is within the EU itself. But it set out its stall as the great welcoming place, the place that protects human rights, that cares about refugees. You would be surprised. I think many of our viewers would be surprised at the extent to which this is the perception that the EU promotes itself around the world. And of course, it also gives the impression, and Germany especially gives the impression, of being welcoming to these migrant flows. Many of these people who are apparently Kurds on the border with Poland are apparently openly saying that the place they want to travel to eventually is Germany. So they're even talking about Germany. They're apparently shouting, Germany, Germany, take us, this sort of thing. So this is, on the one hand, what the EU is doing. On the other hand, it's done deals with various governments on the EU borders, on its borders, to try to control migrant flows. It did those deals with Turkey. It did similar deals with Belarus, with Lukashenko's government in Belarus. But of course, last year, it attempted, let's be straightforward about this, to support the overthrow of the Lukashenko government. It supported the election protests that took place in Belarus. It made it very clear that it wanted to see Lukashenko go. It criticised his legitimacy, and eventually it imposed ever larger escalating sanctions on Belarus. And amongst the things it did is that it tore up all the policies, all the border control agreements that it had made with Belarus. And so what has happened is Lukashenko says, okay, we've no longer got these policies in place. I don't see why I should adhere to policies and agreements that you've torn up. And, if people want to come through my country to the European Union, well, that's the EU's business. It's no longer mine. So, in effect, what's happened is that, on the one hand, they don't want migrants. On the other hand, they don't want to appear that they're, anti-migrant because of all the many issues that we talk about that. They criticize governments in the EU, like those of Hungary and Poland, that are resistant to those sort of things. And at the same time, they do deals with countries like Turkey and Belarus to prevent those migrants coming to the EU. But then when one of those governments, one of those countries behaves in a way that they don't like, they scrap the deals that they've reached with that country, in this case, Belarus, and then they complain about the consequences. So it is a witch's brew, if you like, of policies which have been followed by the EU, all of which have failed in various forms, but which have led to this crisis.
There's so much hypocrisy here. Where do I begin? Where do I begin with the hypocrisy of the European Union? Let's start with the most obvious one for me. Migrants that Hungary, let's just use Hungary in this case because, of course, dictator Orban, right? Migrants that want to enter Hungary, those are good migrants, and Orban is bad, right? Migrants that want to enter Poland via Belarus, those are bad migrants. Those are migrants that are not welcome into Poland. Belarus bad. So migrants that want to enter Hungary, it is the Hungarian government and Orban that's at fault. But when the migrants want to enter via Belarus to Poland, then it's Lukashenko and Belarus who's at fault. Let's start with that hypocrisy right away.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is, and it's absolute and complete hypocrisy. And it tells you what it's really all about. The fact is, it's the leaders of these countries that the EU has issues with. They don't like Orban because Orban is difficult. He defends Hungary. He defends Hungarian traditions. He defends Hungarian culture. So they don't like him. So they want to remove him. So, of course, he must be all the things that you said. He must be a bad person, because, amongst other things, he doesn't take migrants. On the other hand, Belarus, they don't like him either. They don't like the leader there. So, of course, they criticize him because, horror of horrors, he's allowing migrants to cross his country on their way to the EU. The EU says at some points that it actually welcomes migrants. At other points, it says that it doesn't want to have migrants. It talks about migration flows being weaponized by its adversaries, Lukashenko to be precise. In this case, even as it says, on the other hand, that it is some kind of a duty or obligation towards migrants. The whole thing is not just hypocrisy, it's a mass of contradictions, and it's going to create these kind of problems all the time.
Okay, so the European Union sanctions Belarus. They don't allow planes to land in Belarus, EU planes. They don't allow planes to even go over Belarus's airspace. Ursula von der Leyen is saying that she's going to apply more sanctions on Belarus because of this incident at the border. And she said that she's going to lobby countries outside of the EU to not land their airplanes in Belarus. So they've done all of these things to Belarus, regardless of what you think about the Protasevich thing and all of that. Let's just say both sides are at fault. Let's leave it there. Both sides are equal there in that whole incident with Ryanair. Because to be quite honest, to be fair, Belarus actually called for an investigation into what happened there, and the EU said no, we don't want to investigate what happened there. So that's the objective view of what was going on there. But we really, to this day, we still don't know what played out with the Ryanair landing in Minsk. We just don't know because the EU refuses to investigate it. Anyway, the EU, did they not realize that if we're going to continue to hit Belarus and to destroy Belarus and to sanction them and to isolate them, that maybe, just maybe, Lukashenko might retaliate in some form or another, and maybe that retaliation may have to do with the migrants that he is housing within his borders?
No, they didn't see that. They can't see that. They're never able to see that far ahead. As far as the EU is concerned, it punishes other countries. It sanctions other countries. They passively accept it until they crumble. The idea that other countries might respond, that they might take action, which might be negative for the EU, is something that the EU simply can't compute, if you like. It's something that they never think through. They never prepare for it. They never see through what the consequences will be. What they invariably do when that happens, when the other country does take steps which they don't like, is that they, of course, will continue with even more sanctions, because that's the only thing they know how to do. They come back always to that same mechanism: more sanctions, more action, more of the same, which, of course, what is that famous comment that one definition of madness is doing the same thing all over and over and over again and expecting a different result. Well, that's what they do. Whether it's madness or not, they go on doing the same thing again and again and again, and they still expect a different result.
Okay, so Poland and Lithuania, the two countries that I think are the most affected by this. Poland and Lithuania really stepped in it with regards to this, correct? Because if the Polish government and the Lithuanian government played their cards properly and decided to exert some sovereignty over the EU's demands, then they would have told the European Union during the election in Belarus and after the election in Belarus and during all the protests and everything that were going on, no, European Union, we will not get involved in the elections and the protests of our neighbor country. We prefer to have friendly relations with our neighbors. And Germany, Miss Angela and Miss van der Leyen, if you wish to meddle in the Belarus elections, regardless of what you may think the outcome of the elections were, if they were proper elections or not proper, whatever you think, then go do it. We're not going to be the ones on the front line. Instead, they took the opposite approach. And they said, you know what? We'll gladly take on Belarus and we'll gladly give a home to these protesters and gladly smear Belarus in the media and gladly put ourselves out in front. And Angela, you can sit in the background, and Ursula, don't worry, we'll be the ones that take the lead in these elections in Belarus and calling out Lukashenko and giving refuge to these protesters. I mean, this was just bad policy coming from Poland and Lithuania.
It is terrible policy, but you found the clue to explaining it in a previous program that we did, which is that what drives the Polish and Lithuanian governments is their visceral loathing of Russia, and that fogs their sense of clarity. So what they needed to do is, as you absolutely rightly say, maintain good, friendly relations with Belarus. That meant, having good, friendly relations with Lukashenko, difficult character though he is. But it's important to say that Lukashenko always sought good relations with them. He's not the person who's ever sought to wreck relations between Belarus, Poland and Lithuania. On the contrary, he wanted good relations with them. But what was unacceptable, the reason the Poles and the Lithuanians meddled in Belarus's affairs, let's be absolutely straightforward about this, is because they want to detach Belarus from Russia. It's always Russia at the end of the day that is the underlying issue for them. So the result is that they wanted to detach Belarus from Russia, something which was inevitably going to run into enormous problems and resistance and opposition. And they agitated to try and bring down the Lukashenko government. The result is they wrecked relations with Belarus. And now, as a result, they find themselves in exactly that bad situation which you've just described, because they didn't think through, again, the implications of all of this. Poland and Lithuania should seek good relations with Belarus. They should seek good relations with Russia also. Russia does not threaten them. These policies that they pursue, which, as I said, are ultimately policies which have no rational foundation, are only causing them problems. They're weakening their position within the EU, even though it is the EU, in Poland's case, which is trying to reshape Polish society and Polish culture in ways we've discussed. And they are creating problems like the crisis we see on the borders that we see today. But it seems impossible for the moment to get Polish and Lithuanian leaders to grasp this fact.
Yeah, it's so funny watching Poland and like Lithuania, and I saw it with Greece as well. All these countries get played by, I guess, Germany or Merkel. I guess the best person to call out on this is Angela Merkel. They get played by her all the freaking time. In other words, it's while she's building, and she went to Russia and said, I want Nord Stream 2, while she's cutting deals with Russia, while her business patrons are cutting deals with Russia, and they're building pipelines and all these things to the benefit of Germany. She's going out and she's saying, okay, Poland, meddle in, go ahead, meddle in Belarus's affairs. Yeah, Lithuania, Russia, go after Russia, Baltic states. Yeah, Greece, get rid of your pipeline. You don't need a pipeline, Greece. You don't need a pipeline, Bulgaria. No way, don't do business with Russia, sanction Russia. Meanwhile, she's like just sitting there, or she was, because, okay, she may not be in power. Maybe she's in the shadows. But she's sitting there and she's just cutting deals left and right with Russia.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just getting played.
They're getting played all the time, and it's bizarre that they don't see it. But again, I come back to your point about they lack clarity. They don't understand their own interests. I mean, at the end of the day, they've had complicated historical issues with Russia. Nobody disputes it. The Russians don't. The Russians show no interest, however, in going back to the kind of policies or the situations.
Germany has complicated.
Absolutely. So many countries have.
Doesn't stop them.
It doesn't stop them. Exactly. But as I said, the Poles and the Lithuanians remain fixed around this thing, which of course lends the situation to manipulation, to a situation where they can be manipulated, with the result that they now have all these problems on their borders. So on the one hand, they now find themselves, in confrontation with the EU, and at the same time they're running to the EU for help. I mean, it's just this kind of, weird situation where, as I said, it doesn't make any kind of sense. I have to say, I do wonder to some extent whether the Poles aren't, to some extent, playing this up to get the EU on side a bit with them at this time. But whatever it is, it just goes to show how contradictory and foolish this policy is. A country should aim to be good neighbours with the countries around it. It should, especially when one of those countries is as powerful a country as Russia is, and one which is able ultimately to change the environment around it, even in very simple ways. So Poland and Lithuania should be working for good relations with Russia, good relations, obviously, with Belarus. They should aim for peace and friendship around them, not these, weird and wonderful policies that have led them into a mess in Ukraine, which is also, by the way, getting out of control. And with all, we can talk all of these things. And now with Belarus, with, as you said, the Germans as a result, or at least Merkel, having them as a result exactly where she wants them. I mean, it's stupid, but as I said, they don't seem able to see it.
Yeah, I agree. Poland may be playing this up a little bit given the row with the EU and the judicial stuff, but nevertheless, van der Leyen did say, she came out with a statement and she did say more sanctions on Belarus, and she did say she is going to look to pretty much isolate Belarus from the entire world. I mean, that's what she's trying to do. She's trying to get other countries outside of the EU to not fly into Belarus, into Minsk. So I mean, she's actively going after Belarus and actively trying to isolate Belarus and put the squeeze on them. Why is she taking this approach? Why doesn't she just, as an adult, like an adult, a thinking human being, just go to Belarus or invite Lukashenko and just figure it out? Because at the end of the day, Belarus is smack in the middle of Europe. It's part of Europe. It's neighbors with Poland, neighbors with the Baltic states, Ukraine. Why doesn't she just figure it out with Lukashenko and just get past this, get past Protasevich, get past all of this stuff, the Ryanair stuff, and solve this? What's the reason for her to say, no, more sanctions, which is going to push Belarus closer to Russia? No, we want to completely cut off all airlines entering Belarus airspace, even if they're outside of the EU. It's like she's trying to figure out a way to either punish Belarus to a point of no return, or to push Belarus closer with Russia. Or is this about Ursula von der Leyen just saying, you know what? We need more excuses to keep on funding NATO, and we need more excuses to keep on propagating the narrative of Russia is evil and Russia's going to get us. I mean, is this a money thing? Is this a NATO thing? Is this why she's going along with the more sanctions line? I mean, what's the reason for her policy? Because a normal thinking, logical person would just say, you know what? Let me just call Lukashenko and let's just sort this out.
You're not dealing with normal logical thinking people. You're dealing with ideologues, and that's the problem. I mean, this is an ideological project. The EU has now morphed long ago into an ideological project, and she's an ideologue. And ideologues are uncompromising people. What they try is to subordinate everybody into their framework. And yes, of course, she could send an envoy to Minsk. Absolutely, Lukashenko would be prepared to do a deal about this. He said, what's the logic of him abiding by agreements on border control when the EU itself has cancelled them as part of sanctions? But instead, she's going to try to pursue this policy of isolating Belarus. And she's heedless of the fact that Belarus has just signed a whole raft of agreements with Russia to integrate itself even more closely into Russia than before. So the Russians are not going to agree to isolate Belarus in that way. And of course, isolating Russia is a hopeless idea, and Russia will have the backing of China and India and all sorts of other countries. So this policy of trying to isolate Belarus in that way is an absurd one. It's one that's bound to fail.
She's so dumb. It just makes me wonder that there's something else at play here. The worst German defense minister ever. Well, that's not me saying that, by the way. That's other German ministers that have actually said that.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. Well, if there is some cunning plan here behind all of this, then all I can say is that it's a cunning plan that's so complicated that I can't understand it.
All right, we'll leave it there. The Duran.locals.com, the Duran shop. 10% off. Use the code RealNews. Take care.